Hello and welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast. Now, my next guest's blog was recently voted as one of the top 50 sales blogs in the world for the fourth year running. This was by Top Sales World magazine. Now, his book is one of the top 50 sales book in the world for 2019. Now, he has 20-year track record in B2B sales industry, including sales leadership roles for many leading technology companies. Cian is a proponent of ethical and honest approach to sales, which we're going to talk about. So please welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, Cian Mcloughlin.
Hello, nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Janice.
Well, it's lovely to have you on the podcast. Now, first, let me ask you about the fact that we're all experiencing quite challenging times. Now, I know in Australia, they're further ahead of us and they're coming out of lockdown. But, you know, it has had quite a brutal effect in the sales industry and on businesses. So what advice would you give sellers that must ride out this pandemic?
Look, I think the first bit of advice I'd give them is you have to change your approach, because the way that we engage with our customers and our prospects in the past, at least for the current climate, is just not going to work. We can't just do cold outreach and not mention the fact that, you know, their business might be struggling, not mention the fact that their customers might have stopped buying. So I think we need to lead with empathy, and I think we need to lead with authenticity and actually be just people and have a conversation with them. If at all possible, if we can find a way to add some value in the short term, something that helps them, you know, immediately. So that might be, you know, if they're all working from home and you have a product or a service which is very much focused on that area, then talking about that. If they're struggling for, you know, to make ends meet, and we have something that we can do to help them, you know, save some money or reduce costs in their business, again, focus on that. If we don't have anything which is really, really relevant in the current climate, then potentially now is a good time to focus on relationship building, to focus on sowing the seeds that, you know, we will reap down the track. But being tone deaf, not acknowledging what's happening, is probably the worst bit of advice any salesperson can get, because not only will you not get the sale, but you're probably going to ruin the relationship for the long term as well.
Great advice, great advice. So, you know, as author of Amazon #1 bestseller, Rebirth of the Salesman, and you're also co-author of Secrets of Business Success. Now, tell me more about why salespeople need to become great storytellers.
I think, you know, humans are really interesting. We've been learning through stories for millennia. You know, I think before anything was even written down, we were, you know, there's cave paintings in parts of Australia that date back, you know, thousands and thousands of years, and that was where stories were told. You know, this is where to go to find food. These are the animals to stay away from. And even, you know, where I grew up in Ireland, the oral storytelling culture has gone on for generations and generations, and that's how you retain your history, and that's how you share new ideas. And I think people are hardwired to learn through stories. So as a medium for communicating, stories are incredible because they do a whole lot of different things. Firstly, they make your message more easy to understand. They also make it much easier for people to retain and then to tell that information to others. And they light up different parts of the brain. So Janice, if you and I are talking and I start quoting Gartner stats at you, you know, maybe one little part of the front of your brain might light up. But if I start telling you a story and the information I want to pass on to you is contained in that story, but your emotions light up, your memory lights up, all these other parts of your brain light up. And I think that's a really, really important part of interacting with people, is recognizing that people actually buy with their hearts and they justify with their heads. But as an industry, we have this horrible habit of just selling to people's heads and completely forgetting about their hearts. And I think that's a mistake.
It's really interesting, given that we're in challenging times, and you talked about empathy. You've got to lead with empathy, and it's actually not stating the facts. It's about being personable with people and really understanding how they're feeling and the emotion. Correct. And this is what stories evoke, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. And I think, you know, telling your own story at the moment can be really a great way to break down barriers and to start a really honest conversation. You know, I post some stuff on LinkedIn from time to time, and I wrote something the other day in about 5 minutes, and it was just something very personal about a day that I lost a big deal back in my own sales career. And the amount of engagement and the amount of people sharing their own stories off the back of that, because I think we recognize when someone's trying to bullshit us, and we recognize the opposite when someone's being authentic. And that almost sort of forces us to reciprocate with authenticity or with honesty as well, because that's again how people are sort of hardwired. We will respond to the treatment we get. So if you engage with me in a way that makes me feel that you're listening and that you care and that you're present and that you're focused on me, there's a high probability I'm going to reciprocate in the same way, and that's just going to create a much better relationship.
So tell me more about the book, and I'm particularly interested in emotional quotient that you say that salespeople need to grow, and developing curiosity and awareness. And again, it's so relevant in the environment we're in at the moment.
It really is relevant. And what's fascinating for me is that when I set out to write the book, I didn't set out to write the book that I ended up writing. I set out to write a book about win-loss analysis, which is something that we do in my business, where we go in and talk to customers on behalf of vendors. We sit down and we interview, you know, the key decision makers. And we ask them, why did you buy from this company and not from that company? And then we take all the information they've told us and we sort of, you know, scrunch it together and we present it back to the vendor and we say, okay, you know, that deal, that really important deal that you lost, here's all the reasons you lost. And I set out to write a book about that, the process and the mechanics. And I got about halfway through, and I think I got a bit bored writing it. And I said to myself, who's going to want to read this? I mean, whilst the output might be really interesting, the process is not that interesting. So what I then started to do, well, I had to bin the first manuscript, which was a really difficult thing to do. But what I then started writing was a book about what am I hearing from all these customers? What are they telling me in terms of what they love when they interact with salespeople and the stuff that frustrates them? And then what are the implications for sales professionals? How do you stay relevant for the next period of time? What do you need to do? And the thing that kept surprising me was I thought when we spoke to customers, they would talk about product and price, product and price. And actually what we kept hearing was about people and about purpose as distinct from product and price. And so over a period of time, I'm a bit slow, but I eventually got the message, which is, don't just focus on product and price. It's really important to get you from the long list to the short list. But once you're on the short list, customers are looking at something else entirely, and that's the quality of your people, cultural fit. Do we like you? Do you get us? Do you understand us? Do we trust you? What are you going to be like to deal with when there's a problem? Who else have you worked with that we know, that we trust, that thinks you're a really good business? So it's all these other factors which are all emotional intelligence, EQ driven, rather than intellectual or IQ driven. And that was the bit that just blew me away.
When you were talking, I was just thinking, you know, I do a lot in modernizing salespeople, sales teams, and business owners, and getting them to think more social. And that this is exactly the kind of things that you need to be posting. These are the things you need to be talking about. So people, you need to list down everything Cian has said, because they're great blogs and it's a great talking point. And these are things that people engage with, and it makes you authentic and real. Love it.
It does. And I think one of the things that I find interesting is a lot of the times when I talk to people, they're like, well, what would I write about? I've got nothing to say. I've got nothing interesting to say, because they've been there all the way along the journey. So therefore they're not impressed by the stuff that they know. But actually most of us are sitting on a mountain of value, all the things that we've experienced on our journeys that we take for granted, that other people that, you know, haven't had those experiences. I talk about sales 101, and you probably, you know, it's a term you might use. And that's the stuff that we just take for granted. It's just, you do this. But actually, that's a very arrogant statement for me to make, because my understanding of Sales 101 would be completely different to someone else's. And so we really need to actually be a little bit more humble about our own experiences, what we have learned along the journey, and then be willing to share that with others. And we'll get a ton of value reciprocated back to us when we do that.
Absolutely. And you know what buyers have taught me, because they're teaching us as salespeople all the time, but often we're not really listening. We're not really listening in and picking up on all of the clues that they're giving us as to what they really want to hear from us, and the needs that we need to serve.
I couldn't agree more. We did a bit of a sort of a buyer's survey last year, mostly to sort of senior leaders and heads of procurement, and we asked them a whole lot of questions. And at the end, there was a sort of a catch-all question, which was, if you could say one thing to salespeople that they need to do better or they need to focus on more, what would it be? And so we went out to, I don't know, a couple of hundred people, and the two words that kept coming back were listen and understand. Take more time to listen, take more time to understand. Stop just showing up and throwing up. Stop just going into demo mode. Actually listen. Show up with curiosity, with good questions, and with your listening ears on, and then take note and then learn that way. Because as you said, customers will teach us how to sell to them if we ask them the right questions, and then we're engaged with their responses.
Absolutely. So, you know, what do you think about the B2B sales world in terms of sellers? Have they shifted enough to be buyer-centric and really listen in? And you know, we've kind of started to talk about that, but what would be your advice in order to move it further?
So I think do much better discovery. We have this tendency to rush through that discovery piece into the, let me tell you about my thing, let me show you my widget. And that's a massive missed opportunity, because, you know, the analogy I would use is if you have a jigsaw puzzle with all the pieces turned over, it's really hard to do that jigsaw. As we do these discovery conversations with the customer, they're turning over those pieces of the jigsaw for us. We're asking them, you know, why did you start looking for a solution? What brought you out to market? And why wouldn't you just stick with your current provider? And you know, what does the future look like for you? And why did you make time to spend, you know, half an hour with me today? All of these questions, and they're telling us stuff. And then we're turning over these puzzle pieces. Now it's much easier for us to join the dots between what they care about and what we can actually deliver for them. Whereas most of the time, we're just throwing mud against the wall and hoping something sticks. And that's what a lot of salespeople are doing. Unfortunately, it's focusing on their product and their, you know, solution and their features and functions before they've earned the right to do that.
Yeah. A buyer becomes a buyer only after the second time that they've brought from you. So explain a bit more about that.
Look, I think certainly the world I spend a lot of time in is sort of the enterprise technology sales world. So a lot of the decisions that buyers have can be very, very large, very strategic, and therefore very risky. And in order to sort of test the waters a little bit, quite often what they'll do is they'll do a small project with a company. They'll buy a little bit of this, or they'll try something before they do the end-to-end transformation. So what they're really doing is they're dipping their toe in the water, and they're giving us a chance. They're giving us an opportunity. And if we deliver on our promise, and we, you know, over deliver and, you know, on our promises, then there's a good chance that we'll earn the right to see what's behind the doors and get the bigger opportunity. But a lot of the time, we don't do that. One of the biggest frustrations we hear from customers is they sign on the dotted line, and then the salesperson they've been working with disappears, and some inverted commas account manager gets helicoptered in who knows nothing about their business, they haven't got a relationship with, and they have to start coaching that person. It's a huge frustration, because vendors are thinking, well, I want my hunters over here, and I want my farmers over here, and I want my SDRs over, and they're thinking about it from the perspective of what works best for me as a vendor. How do I sell? How do I structure my sales team? Not what's the experience that my customer wants to have, and what's the best experience we can give them. So we need to actually get much, much better at understanding the buyer's journey and then mapping our sales process to that, rather than thinking, well, this is how we want to sell, so poor Mr. Customer is just going to have to, you know, take it or leave it. That's a massive issue. And the other thing is, we just need to become easier to do business with.
It's, you know, I was really smiling because I knew where you were going with this, that, you know, they're kind of like the hit and run, you know, they sell and completely disappear. And it's like, It's crazy, you know, the time it takes to nurture and to gain that customer, and then to throw it all away, in that you don't continue to nurture that relationship for the potential long-term value of the customer, which is the real deal, isn't it? It's not the initial and sell. And it just seems like, kind of, when you look at this, because you see it again and again and again in industry,
yes, you do.
in the way that it's set, you think you're shooting yourself in the foot. Why would you do that? Why? And I was looking at this the other day, in that salespeople are trained to sell. That's their DNA. And actually, they're not, it's not, they then pass it over, or it's someone else's problem, and very much seen in that way. And it's really hard to get that out of the, you know, their genes, that they're there to sell. It's all about the sales process, because that's the way that traditionally salespeople are taught. How can we?
But then it also comes down to compensation, I think. I think, you know, no, I'm not saying everybody is coin operated, but a lot of people will behave the way they're incentivized to behave. So if I'm saying to you, Janice, I need you to sign net new, white space, blue sky, that's all you're being compensated on, then you'll do that. You'll go and focus over there. If I'm saying, I only want you to account manage these 3 accounts and expand the footprint, then you'll focus over there. If I say to you, I want you to win some new accounts, and then I want you to account manage those and broaden the footprint, which might be a better outcome for those customers, then you'll behave that way. So I think we definitely have to look at the compensation models in some of these businesses. And then we also have to look at, you know, what they call the sales cadence. I had an old CEO who used to say something which was a bit disturbing. He said, every week is a month, every month is a quarter, and every quarter is the most important quarter there's ever been or there will ever be. So it was just a very, very transactional, short-term mindset around, we just close and we close and we close and we close. And what happens, particularly in larger businesses, in my experience, is we stop thinking about customers as customers, and we start thinking about them as deals in the forecast. And how can I pull that one forward? How can I increase the deal value on this one? How can I de-risk this one? How can I close this one next week because I've got a bonus or incentive? And what that does is it drives a terrible culture, but it you know, makes numbers the be all and the end all, and that's a flawed operating model, in my opinion.
How do you try and change that? Because you have, you know, the stakeholders, the investors that are looking for revenue generation. So they create a system geared around that. And it's, you know, it takes a very brave person and it is a cultural change, to completely change that culture all the way down the line. So how does that come about?
Well, I don't know if it's by accident or by design, but I think the biggest thing that's worked to change that has actually been the move to the cloud and the adoption of as a service. Because back in the bad old days, if you're selling something to someone and it was, you know, an upfront payment, and then maybe we hit them with a, you know, a maintenance invoice every 12 months, but effectively they bought the thing. What's happening now is every month, or, you know, every quarter, they get to vote with their wallets by saying, we want to keep you, or we want to kick you out. We want to keep you. So all of a sudden, customer retention and customer adoption and expanding the footprint has become much, much more important to these businesses, because they care less about the big upfront deal and much more about the long tail of revenue that comes. So that's actually starting to change the sales behavior, starting to put much more focus on adoption and usage and customer satisfaction and net promoter score and all those things, which are much more customer-centric metrics, in my opinion, than the bad old days of just, you know, revenue and deals closed. So I think that's starting to influence it. And then I think also the competitive landscape is shifting, because customers have more information than they've ever had, and they have more choice than they've ever had. And so they're able to vote with their wallets and say, I don't like how you're trying to engage with me, so we're just going to go over here. And I think that's forcing vendors all over the world to rethink things, and hopefully gradually we're moving in the right direction towards a more customer-centric model or a more buyer-centric model.
Excellent. So what tried and tested strategy would you offer listeners to scale their sales?
Look, I'm 100% biased with this, but I will give you some context. When I was in my corporate career, I remember working on deals, big deals, and it takes 6 months of your life, and then you lose it. And then you'd sort of look around and you'd have a chat internally about how did we lose that one, you know, and we'd all kind of cry into our beer and move on to the next one. And to me, that just didn't make sense. It's like, why aren't we finding out exactly why we lost so we can learn? Or why aren't we finding out exactly why we won so that we can learn and again, get better and improve? So it might seem deceptively simple, but it's incredibly powerful. I know because we've been doing this for 10 years for companies all over the world. It's analyze why you win and analyze why you lose, and do that by sitting down with your customer and actually having a proper debriefing conversation with them after they've made their final buying decision, whether they've gone with you or they've gone with someone else. Your cost of sale and your effort has earned you the right to that feedback. But the vast majority of salespeople and businesses are leaving that feedback on the table. And it's like literally walking away and just leaving a mountain of gold behind because we haven't got a mechanism to mine the gold. They need to mine that. They need to listen to their customers. They need to take action based on the feedback they've heard and improve and test and get better and learn from their wins and their losses. That's the feedback I'd give them.
Brilliant. Excellent feedback. Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of the podcast, but I'm definitely getting you on again because I know that we've got so much more to talk about. You've given real value, and I do appreciate that. How can listeners get hold of you? Because I know that they will.
So you can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. There's not too many Cian Mcloughlins on there, so please do reach out. Or you can head to the Trinity website, which is trinityperspectives.com.au, and we've got a ton of free blogs and downloads and podcasts and all sorts of good stuff. You're not obliged to sign up. You can just jump in and grab it and help yourselves. So go for your life. Or you can obviously grab a copy of the book on Amazon as well. But it's not Death of the Salesman, it's Rebirth of the Salesman.
Sorry, Rebirth.
No, you didn't say that. I'm just.
Oh, okay. I thought I did.
No. For those who remember the old book, the Death of the Salesman, which is what I based the title on in the first place. Yeah. Excellent.
Well, thank you for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Take care.
Thanks, Janice. Bye-bye.